Hey guys, Pastor Tanner here. Got my library indexing, so I'm not sure the impact that's going to have, but we're just going to keep going forward. Part 2 of my sermon prep on the beheading of John the Baptist. Gotten some interesting ideas so far. As always, feel free to interact with me in chat. Go from there. Does it say online now, Rafe? Are you there, Rafe? Is it working now? Hey there, Rafe. Good to see you, brother. Hope you're doing okay today. Sorry about the mix-up. I realized I hadn't adjusted my title, so I wanted to adjust it before I started the new stream. Doing okay, Rafe. I'm a little tired. I had a long day yesterday and didn't get much sleep. So I'm a little bit tired, but I'm doing alright. Not horrible. Rafe says, today I bought John Phillips commentaries. That's a good move, Rafe. I really, really liked the John Phillips commentary when I looked into it. It had a lot of good stuff in there. Very, very pleased with it. Yeah, I think that's a good call. I've even saved it up here because I like it so much. Yeah, and I didn't use them much before either. I don't even know if I got them in a base package or what, but I hadn't used them much, and I was just searching through, and man, such good content, doesn't overdo it. Yeah, very, very pleased with the John Phillips. That's right, Rafe. For preaching, it's going to be excellent. I hope the indexing isn't messing anything up. It looks like everything's going okay. Don't think I'm dropping frames, so that's nice. Rafe says Logos redid their right-click menu. Really? Doesn't look too different to me. Maybe that's what the indexing is doing right now, is fixing that. Got you, Rafe. Once it updates, I'll check it out. I think this author, although they have some interesting ideas, really overstates the implication of the word when it comes to this interaction with John the Baptist. Rafe says, so basically last Sunday I went to a school party after church. I'll just say this, I received so much love and support from my congregation over my teaching through Titus. One even offered to pay for any books I needed. Assured him I needed nothing, lol. Rafe, that's awesome to hear, brother. That's so cool. It's always nice to hear some encouragement like that. Especially, I feel like we can often be our own worst critics. I almost never walk away from a sermon thinking that I did a great job. And then when I have people come up to me and tell me they were encouraged by it, it really helps me out because oftentimes I feel like I failed. So that's awesome, brother. Good to hear. Rafe says it's overwhelming to think they would give me that support. Yeah, that's great to hear, brother. Rafe says I will be the same way. Man, yeah, I've never walked away from the pulpit. I don't think ever. Maybe once I've walked away and thought that was really good. Out of hundreds of sermons, it just never happens. But it's good. I feel like it's God's way of keeping us humble as well. Because I oftentimes have had a lot of people come up and tell me how great they thought it was and all that type of stuff. And it's like, wow, I didn't realize it was that impactful for you, you know? So. Ooh, is backwards. Whoa, it's way different. That's pretty wild. Why doesn't it say lemma here? I guess they want you to go based off the symbols. Wow. This might be a good change. Let's go lemma. Interesting. This doesn't seem too bad. I feel like I could get used to this. Rafe says, I haven't even explored what it entails. Yeah, it's very interesting. They like flip-flop these, but not only that, they've got all these drop-downs now where you can check out different aspects of the text, which looks intriguing. And if you pull this, you got your, like, you can go lemma over here. You can start a Bible word study. Now I wonder, yeah, I've got all my prioritized lexicons right here. You can just run instant searches. I don't know, seems pretty hot. I think I'm okay with it. Very cool. Man, this song is the definition of chill. I'm glad I listened to this. It's exactly what I want. Ooh, this is an interesting idea. Check this out. For Herod himself had given orders for John to be arrested. Right here. When Herod heard John, he was greatly puzzled, yet he liked to listen to him. When Herod heard John, he was greatly puzzled, yet he liked to listen to him. What's the liked here? Is it pleasure? Hideos. He liked to listen to him. She pleased Herod in his dinner gifts. So he liked listening to him. And then she pleased Herod in his dinner guests. And in a sense, Herod trades a higher pleasure, listening to John, listening to his word, listening to the word of God, for a lower pleasure, a carnal dance. It's interesting. This one's too fast-paced. Rafe says, for better or for worse, I have my manuscript almost done. I simply need to add some application. That's awesome, Rafe. And is it this Sunday you're preaching? I thought it was next Sunday. It might be this Sunday. I feel like time flies. I thought it was next Sunday, though. That's awesome you've made so much progress, though. Very cool. Rafe says, yeah, this Sunday. Got it. Very good, brother. That's awesome. I prayed for you today. I saw your message, and I know you were concerned. Sermon prep will come. It'll come. You'll get a feel for what works and what doesn't, what's a waste of time, and what's time well spent. Rafe says, thanks so much. No problem, brother. No problem. Rafe says, my mind feels like it did when I was trying to study first year Greek. I hear you, brother. I hear you. It's not easy. Not easy stuff. Rafe says it's exhausting to learn how to prepare a sermon, even a bad one. Yeah, I hear you, brother. I hear you on that one. It can take up a lot of time. That's for sure. And not just taking up time, right? But mental energy, like you're saying. You invest so much into it.
Tuning out of starlight, the innocent lifetime flickers and flashes under a canvas. No, nobody seems worth it, while the feeling's sophisticated. The view is so restrained. The past is nearing closer and closer, I fear. So let's just cut the bullshit and tell me who's independent. Thumbs a little in and your life's escaping your mind. Keep in mind, well, the air ain't as free as it used to be, but that's quite alright when you're still 18, it seems to be. And I'll tell you who's overrated. What's a beautiful person with some hideous dreams?
Rafe says, I have 2 points and an application at the end. I think will work. The first 2 are in the text, and the third one I will prove and provide application. Elders are God's appointed means for ruling his church, verse 5. Elders have appointed characteristics they are to model, verses 6 through 9. Application, every Christian is called to follow the examples of their church elders, Hebrews 13:7. I'll bring in more. It seems like it could work, Rafe. One thing I would say, these first 2, the way you have them stated, they're not really applications. They're just statements of truth. So to turn them into applications, like, for example, I don't know the church context, but you've got elders are God's appointed means for ruling his church, right? One of the applications, and again, you need to judge the atmosphere in the church you're preaching in, but one of the applications of that truth is something along the lines of, so as this church looks for an elder, it must make sure, well, no, not even that. That'd be for the second point. So you could, for the first one, you could say, as a church, we ought to be looking for an elder to rule this church. That's God's appointed means, and that's what we should be looking for and praying for. You see how I've stepped out of a truth, elders are God's appointed means for ruling his church, into an application. Then, if we're going to be a church, we need to look and pray for God's elder to come here. Verses 6 to 9, elders have a God-appointed characteristics they are to model, right? As this church looks for an elder to rule, it should be looking for certain characteristics and qualities that will help us to make sure we're picking the right man, God's man. You see what I mean? You don't have to do that, Rafe. Rafe says, I did not know I was supposed to do that. You don't have to, but I find that it helps break up a message a lot when I include a lot of application, right? So, if I go to my previous sermon on timeless gospel principles, I had so much application in this, it was crazy. So I talked about being commissioned by Jesus, and something I told everyone is, if you are commissioned by Jesus, you are his representative on earth, therefore act in a manner like he would, right? That was one application. Then I came over here on this other point, the challenge, and I talked about how important missions is. So not only did I say you should act in a manner that Christ would, but I said missions is very, very important. You need to support missions. We need to be about missions. I also said you need to build relationships with other people. That's an essential aspect of the gospel. I told people that they should preach repentance to others because that's an essential aspect. And so I had lots of applications throughout the message. You don't always have to do that, but I find it breaks up the explanation sometimes. Rafe says, oops, I already sent them my outline. I had no idea. I hope it does not ruin it. No, don't worry about it, Rafe. It won't ruin it at all. But I like to, if you find that, look around and try to be present while you're preaching. And if people are tired during your message, or they seem like they're checked out a little bit, it can be helpful to include more illustration or application throughout and pepper it in there throughout the entire message. One advantage you have, I preached an hour on this topic, right? One advantage you have is you're going half an hour, so it won't feel as long to them, and you can have more time for explanation and then application at the end. So that'll work fine. When I'm going in a full hour, I feel like I have to include multiple points of application because it's opportunity for people to check back in. So they're not just listening to me drone on for 45 minutes about interesting facts about the text. Does that make sense? So you don't have to do that. I just thought it'd be interesting application for each of your main points. I like to do explanation, illustration, application for every main point, right? So you have 2 main points, I would do 2. Explanation, illustration, application, and then move on to your second point, explanation, illustration, application. You don't have to do it that way, but I can find it can be helpful. So what you did with my points were what? So what I would have done, Rafe, here, let me bring the chat on here so you can see what's going down. So what I would have done, Rafe, is this. You've got 2 points right here, 2 main points. And then this point is kind of a follow-up application on this one. So what I would have done is I would say, elders are God's appointed means for ruling his church, verse 5. I would state, place, prove that, explain it, right? I'd go to verse 5, talk about what it means, and then I would illustrate that in some way, shape, or form, right? So my illustration might be, imagine an organization with no leader. Imagine a country without a president. Imagine, that might be an illustration I give. These are the sorts of things an organization needs leadership. It needs structure. And God has established that for his church as well, and he has established that by elders. So that's your illustration, is trying to get them to imagine an organization with no leader. So too, God's organization must have a leader. That's your illustration. And then your application could be something along the lines of, so this church, I'm preaching here, filling in all of those things, but this church can only function long term if it has an elder that can rule it. That is something that God desires. So here in this church, your application now is, we should pray for an elder to come along. We should pray for God's man in this position, and we should hope that he is going to bring someone along that will honor and glorify him and will build this church up. And so that's explanation, illustration, application, all of point number 1. Point number 2. Elders have appointed characteristics they are to model, verses 6 to 9. And so I would state, place, prove that. You've got this list, and you can talk about that. And then illustration. Not only does God's church need an elder, but not just any elder will do. We can't simply appoint anyone that we think is right or good. Think back to Saul, for example. When Israel wanted a king, they appointed Saul because he looked right and good to them, but God's man was David. And so too, we need to make sure that we're not appointing somebody to be an elder when they are not God's man. How do we know which man is God's man? We know which man is God's man because he gives us a list right here, and these are the characteristics they should model. And so that's your illustration. Now what's your application again? Your application is, so as this church searches for an elder, a leader to be appointed over it, it should search for someone who models out these characteristics and qualities clearly, because that is what God's man looks like. And then you could do a follow-up application. Now, at this point, you might think that the text only applies to the church's search for an elder or the church looking for leadership, but that is not the case. Remember Hebrews 13:7. Hebrews 13:7 teaches that we ought to follow the examples of our church elders. So, given that is the case, we recognize that verses 6 through 9 are not just a job description or a list of requirements that our elder must have, but it's also a list of requirements that we must fulfill as well as Christians. And so, and you can go into that. So those would be some ideas. Rafe says, see, I have no idea what I'm doing. I have no idea how to illustrate. I think after this teaching, I will take a break and try to learn how to formulate a sermon better. I even read a book and it did not help me. My teaching is not like that. Man, I messed up. I did not have any application until the last. Yeah, I can't do this. I would have no idea how to fix it. Rafe, brother, it's not wrong or bad or broken. Not at all, brother. I just want to encourage you what you could do in the future. I think your application is good. And if your teaching is more heavy on the explanation, which is what I'm assuming it is, I bet you go into how do you flesh out points 1 and 2? Do you go into a lot of explanation on the background, where creed is at? Do you go into the Greek words? What's the explanation you go into, brother? Rafe, it's not a fail. It's not a fail, brother. Don't get down on yourself about that. I'm just trying to give you the kind of the direction I would go. You go in this cycle. Let me see if I can pull. Let's see. I'll just put it in here. Explanation, illustration, application. These three you want to try and include. You don't have to, but you want to try and include in each main point. So you'll have a main point. You'll come along and explain your main point. Boom. Now your main point, after you explain it, it might lead to some subpoints, right? So you got 3 subpoints, right? And they could be a variety of things. Now you've explained the text, you've told them what it says, and you've given them maybe some nuances what the text teaches. Now it's time to illustrate it for them. So you're illustrating what you were essentially explaining with some of the examples that I gave, and then you apply it to their lives. This is what you should do with that. And then you repeat. Main point 2, explanation, subpoint, and maybe you only have one subpoint on this one. Or maybe no subpoints. Maybe your explanation is clear as is. No problem. Illustration, application. Boom. And that's how you go throughout the sermon generally. But it doesn't always happen this way. Sometimes I can't find an application. Sometimes I can't think of one for my main point. Guess what? I just don't address it. I try to illustrate, I explain, I illustrate, and then I move on to main point 2. It's okay. You don't have to do it for every time. It can just be helpful for people. That's all. Let's see. Rafe says, well, I talked about Crete last time. This time I will give a little reminder and say a little bit about each verse. So yeah, it's more expositional, if that's the right term. I want to try to do what is good. And hey, don't let me rob you of your sermon prep time. No problem, brother. Don't worry about me. No problem at all. I got many more hours ahead of me as sermon prep, but I appreciate your concern. So this is generally the structure you want to go with, and that's fine if you go into your explanation. You talked about Crete, you're going to explain each verse, that's perfect. And if it's, again, especially because your message is shorter, that helps. So what you're going to do is, it sounds like something like this. No illustration or application here. Maybe 1 or 2 subpoints on main point 1. Then you're going to go main point 2, explain. It sounds like you don't have an illustration. And then you're going to apply at the end. This can be okay, right? This can be okay. Just understand what you're losing or what you're giving up if you don't have an illustration, if you don't have application, those sorts of things. Just understand what you're losing. So illustrations help to motivate people, right? So if you don't have any illustrations, then in your application, you're going to want to emphasize the motivation, right? You're going to want to really focus on that and try to spend some more time fleshing that out, right? It looks to me like you got plenty of explanation, so I wouldn't go into more depth on that. The other thing is you got explanation back to back. That can be okay too, but just know what tends to happen when you explain a lot. Even if it's good stuff, when you're explaining a lot, people get tired. They can only take in so much content. So if you don't have application or illustration right here, that's fine, but recognize you may need to pause. You may need to slow down. You may need to get people to consider. Maybe you need to step back and speak in more colloquial terms at this type of point because it helps people to digest what you're saying. Illustration application help break up the explanation so that people can glom onto your ideas in digestible chunks. They can pick out each piece. So that's all. Just know what you're lacking and try to fill that in as you, first of all, practice, but also as you are up there preaching. You'll get an opportunity to think about it and just try to think actively about how it's going. Try to read your audience and see how they're feeling, right? Are they responding well to you? Those sorts of things. And that'll help you, I think, judge that. Rafe says, I desire to improve. I will try. Okay, thank you. Yeah, no problem, brother. I want to see you succeed. You've been nothing but supportive of me since I started this whole journey, right, of streaming. You're pretty much my first follower, so I want to do everything I can to help you, brother. Don't worry about that. But those are some ideas I would have. You didn't fail. Don't worry about it. Think about what worked and what didn't, and then again, it's an iterative process. You work on it a little bit, try it. That worked, this didn't. You work on it a little bit more, you try it. That worked, this didn't, and you'll get better and better as you go. Again, iterative process. You're not going to write your first or second sermon and it's going to be great. It's going to take you 20, 30, 40 sermons before you start getting a feel for your process, what works, what doesn't, and all of those things, brother. If you get up and you preach Christ, if you preach the word, right, it's going to be okay. You can work on the details and on excelling and being more skilled later. Oh, my water's already gone. Interesting. Rafe says, I will take a short break from teaching after this time so I can get better. One problem is I do not know what works. I will ask some men for feedback this time. He's put works in quotes. So I think another problem is the teaching I was under for the past 4 years never preached like you were telling me. So I have to relearn things. And there are a lot of different ways of preaching, Rafe. This is just how I go about it. I get good results with it. Have you listened to some of my sermons on the website? You can see the structure of how I go about it, and that might be able to help you kind of formulate a pattern that works for you. Again, you don't have to do it exactly the way I do, but I do seem to get good feedback from people, and they seem to enjoy the messages. So that's the direction I would lean. But if somebody proposed an alternate way of doing things, I wouldn't immediately write them off, not at all. So maybe listen to some of my sermons on our church website and just get a feel for if that's how you want to preach. If you don't want to preach that way, that's okay. That's okay. I'm not criticizing at all. Do I want to get into the Jezebel and Herodias thing? I don't think I do. I think I want to get into Strauss, Zecnt. He had some really good stuff. Man, I haven't even come up with a proposition. I wonder if I go inductive on this sermon. Could be my hook if I go inductive. I just can't think of a formal proposition that won't just fall flat. Let me read about inductive versus deductive again. I swear every time I preach inductive, I always have to look at this again. Oh no. What was it? It's called like preaching that... I forget even what it's called. Preaching that dances or something like that. Preaching to be heard. There we go. Preaching to be heard. Inductive structure. So if I was to go deductive, let's just think. For right now, if I was to go deductive, because following Christ may cost us everything, we must be willing to give up anything. Something like that, if I was to go deductive. Now inductive, I need to ask questions. Inductive, the ultimate question might be something like, what is the cost of following Christ? No, see, that doesn't even... Inductive wouldn't work here because the text too obviously answers this question. Let's look at deductive. Maybe it will be deductive. The deductive structure begins with the entire thesis statement up front. Since in this kind of sermon the thesis is stated in the introduction, the advantage of the deductive sermon is clarity. Tension cannot work the way it does in the inductive approach. The problem and solution have been stated together at the front. There's no waiting for the complement. Tension, however, can still be developed. See, this is going to be my challenge, is maintaining tension. This text is too obvious, right? The text is too obvious. King Herod heard about this, for Jesus' name had become well known. Some were saying John the Baptist has been raised from the dead, and that is why miraculous powers are at work in him. Others say he is Elijah, and others claim he is a prophet, like one of the prophets of long ago. But when Herod heard this, he said, John, whom I beheaded, has been raised from the dead. For Herod himself had given orders to have John arrested, and he had him bound and put into prison. He did this because of Herodias, whom he had married. For John had been saying to Herod, it is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife. So Herodias nursed a grudge against John and wanted to kill him, but she was not able to because Herod feared John and protected him, knowing him to be a righteous and holy man. When Herod heard John, he was greatly puzzled, yet he liked to listen to him. Finally, the opportune time came. On his birthday, Herod gave a banquet for his high officials and military commanders and leading men of Galilee. When the daughter of Herodias came in and danced, she pleased Herod and his dinner guests. The king said to the girl, ask me for anything you want and I'll give it to you. And he promised her with an oath, whatever you ask, I'll give you up to half my kingdom. What shall I ask for? She asked. Went to her mother, the head of John the Baptist. Once she heard to the king with the crest, why don't you give me right now the head of John the Baptist on a platter? The king was greatly distressed because of his oaths and his dinner guests. He did not want to refuse her, so immediately sent the executioner with orders to bring John's head. The man went, beheaded John in the prison, and brought back his head on the platter. He presented it to the girl, and she gave it to her mother. On hearing this, John's disciples came and took the body and laid it in a tomb. I do think the overall big picture is the cost of discipleship. I do think that's true. But it's played out in a story format. So the text already tells us that the cost of following Christ might be death. I don't think I can develop this inductively. I think it's too obvious. If I say something like, what's the cost of following Christ? They're like, yeah, clearly John died. That's what the cost is. An inductive sermon would have the subject as the overarching question right at the outset, but the answer would be withheld. Yeah, see. One difficulty that preachers will encounter with the inductive structure is that the answer will often arise in the text sooner than the end of the passage. You thought the inductive pattern would work, but it really doesn't. Now I could change the question, not what is the cost of following Christ, but instead, I could make a big deal out of the contrast between Herod's desire for short-term pleasure versus long-term pleasure. I could make that part of it. I could make Herod like a foil of like, don't live like Herod, don't do what Herod does. I don't know how good it would be though. This isn't a simple one. It is not simple. Maybe I think it's not simple because it's too simple. That might be the issue. Now, here's a way I could do it. I could go deductive. Because following Christ may cost us everything, we must be willing to give up anything. And then I could really press into some challenging main points and maintain tension that way. Talk about Christian discipline. There might be a big application here. Ooh, I think I know where to go. I could ask people if they're willing to give up their life for Christ, because that's the obvious one. But then I can follow up with, are you willing to give up your life? And what I mean by that is the next 40 years, what are you going to do? How are you going to spend your time? What are you going to focus your attention on? All of those things. And I can get into the idea of discipline. I can talk about how Herod didn't have long-term discipline. He had short-term discipline, right? I can talk about how Herod tried to save face with his guests, all of these things. And all of these are contrasted with godly discipline. And then I can wrap up with point number 3. John and Christ. And I can show how John is a prototype of Christ. Now, see, this point is hidden. No one will see this coming. And this one, likely nobody will see in the way that I'm going to describe it. So I might be able to go inductive with this one. If I go inductive, but I answer the first question clearly and quickly, then people are going to be like, what's left to come? So that might work okay. So my inductive question could be, are you willing to give up your life for Christ? I could answer that. And then I could follow up with, are you willing to live your life for Christ? And then I could end with a very strong, statement of, oh man, this will be good. Christ as, no, John the Baptist as a Christ prototype, John the Baptist as a oh, what is it called? It's not an image, picture, I guess, as a picture of Christ. And then Christ gave up his life for you. Christ lived for you. I like that. Yeah, and I haven't done an inductive in a while, so I'm going for it. And let's do a new canvas, and I think I'm going to call it Life and Death in Christ. Man, this is encouraging. I was struggling with this text a little bit, and I was unsure where I was going to go with it and how it would flow, all that type of stuff. And I feel like this will be nice, and it'll have some hooks that people aren't ready for, which is always good. Keep people's attention. Through 29. So this will be one question. And this is just gonna be full-blown gospel right here. I think this will work. I like how that developed. Okay, now that I got the broad structure, let's go through ZECNT and see if we can't get some really good principles out of this thing. Ooh, interesting. John imposes Jewish law on Herod, who is a Gentile? Pretty sure. Maybe not. Hold on 1 second, I'm getting a phone call I need to answer. Just spam like always. Oh, here we go. Oh no, it's someone working for him. Here we go. In various ways, scholars bring into the discussion the Idumean background of Antipas's grandfather and the designation of his father, Herod the Great, as half-Jewish, so that Antipas might be considered neither Jewish nor Gentile. None of that appears in the New Testament. For early Christians, Herod was a Jewish figure, whom Acts 4:27 clearly aligns with the people of Israel, counterposed to the Gentiles. So he was a Jew. Thank you, Raymond Brown. Interesting response from Ahab. Rafe says, cool. What's cool, Rafe? Rafe says, what I'm getting into is cool. Oh, I've got you. Yeah, Mark Strauss is excellent. I've enjoyed a lot of his stuff so far, and I didn't even know I had the ZE CNT. How did I get into Mark 6 and not know I had this one, right? Yeah, it's good. And I think this is going to unfold pretty well. Rafe says, so even though my sermon is not where I want it to be, I did make improvements from last time. I have a homiletical idea and a purpose in mind, and I made an actual structure. That's great, Rafe. And I would encourage you, make what decision you want in terms of, are you going to take a break so that you could study and learn? Or something I would encourage you to consider is keep pressing forward and continue to learn as you go. And the more often you're preparing sermons, I think the better, more capable you'll be in terms of putting together good sermons. So consider it as an option. If you still decide you want to take a break, that's fine. But consider it as an option that, you know what, I'm going to keep pressing forward. Each sermon's going to be better than the last, and I'm just going to keep improving. And I think that's a valid way to go about it as well. So just consider that. But yeah, I think that's great. Having a homiletical idea, a purpose you're trying to drive at. I like the structure you showed me with your 2 points in your application. I think that makes a lot of sense. And so, yeah, I think you're headed in the right direction, brother. Nice. Got some good stuff out of this one. Burlap TV on Twitch asks, Heyo, what drove you towards becoming a pastor? Really good question, Burlap. I became a pastor because I enjoyed preaching and teaching so much. I don't know how to describe it. When I became a Christian, I really wanted to learn about the Bible, and as I studied it, I just found that I learned about it really quickly, and I wanted to share it with others. And so as I learned about it quickly, I quickly started teaching Bible studies and things like that, and I enjoyed it so much that I just kind of kept going with it. Yeah, good question. It just kind of happened. It's very interesting. But I became a Christian in college, and that's part of what drove me to do that. Burlap TV on Twitch asks, how uncommon do you think conversion at that age is, or perhaps just discovering religion in college? I think it's fairly uncommon, Burlap. I think a lot of people follow the religion that they grew up with. And so I wouldn't have a percentage to assign to it, but I think it's relatively uncommon. Most Christians I meet today grew up in Christian homes. And that's just the fact of the matter. I don't see that as necessarily a negative thing, but I do think my experience was irregular compared to how it typically works for people. If I had to give a percentage, man, I would say maybe 5 to 10%. That might be too small, but I don't know for sure. 20% max, though, of people, I think, become Christians later in life. I think the majority of people believe in the religion that they grew up with. Although that changes as well. A lot of people renounce the faith later in life also. So it's a mixture. But I do think it's uncommon. I think Luke 9:24 would be a better follow-up verse to compare this. Just want to copy it. I don't want to do a full-blown visual copy. Let's try that. Yeah, I think that's a better follow-up verse. Luke 9:24 will be my follow-up verse. Then we'll do Mark 6. Yeah, I like the structure a lot better. (13 to 29). Got a lot of verses this Sunday. It's gonna be an interesting one. Luke 9:24, Mark 6. Jumping right in. So maybe I'll talk about Fox's Book of Martyrs later. Burlap on Twitch asks, what are some of the more challenging aspects of being a pastor that most people are unaware of? Wow, great question, Burlap. What are some of the more challenging aspects of being a pastor that most people are unaware of? Let me think. Let me think. I'll start with these. First, most challenging aspect of being a pastor is that your life is under constant scrutiny. And I wouldn't have a problem with this. I'm generally an open book. I don't try to hide things. But when there are certain scruples that members of your church have and certain scruples that members of your church don't have, and you don't match their scruples, then people will have questions and they're gonna scrutinize you. So I'll give you an example. Halloween. In some churches, Halloween is not seen as a big deal. You can go ahead and participate in it. It's fine. It's a fun sort of event. In other churches, some people think Halloween is the devil's holiday and that you shouldn't participate in it at all. Regardless of where you stand on that topic, whatever decision you make in terms of whether or not you and your family are going to participate in Halloween are sending an implicit message to your entire congregation about whether or not that's okay. I had some visiting people leave our church because of certain stances I took on what I would call Christian freedoms. And they were very unhappy with the stances I took, and they left the church. And so your life is under constant scrutiny. People questioning what you're doing, why you're doing it, and if they think a pastor should do that thing. So that is one of the difficult aspects. Another difficult aspect is that everyone is critical about different things. And so I'm thinking right now about my preaching. I've had some people come up before and tell me, I loved that you did this in your sermon. That was great. And then I have somebody come up right behind them almost and be like, I hate that you did this in your sermon. That was bad. And the question is, which can I do? It's everybody wants to be critical, but they all want to be critical about different things. And some of the things one person is critical about, the other person is very happy about. And trying to balance all of those things is very, very difficult. And trying to help people see why you take the stances you take is very, very difficult as well. So navigating those relationships, I think, is part of the problem. The third thing that I have found is that people want help on their own terms. So people will come to me. Let's say a couple comes to me and they are having trouble in their marriage, okay? And I consent to help them. And so I meet with them and I begin to counsel them. And fairly early on in the conversation, it becomes clear to me what the problem is or what the multiple problems are. When I begin pointing those things out to them, they oftentimes feel completely free to just shut it down. We're not going to talk about that. We're not going to go here. We're not going to go there. And I'm like, yeah, but that's the problem. And I can help you if you just be willing to work with me on this. But they'll come to you and say, help us with our marriage. And then when you try to help them, they will not let you go there. And it's like, oh, you want help, but you want it on your terms. You want me to help you if you think it's a good idea. But if you don't think it's a good idea, you don't want my help anymore. And I've had people run off on me after they said they would be willing to get help from me because I wasn't helping them on their terms. I wasn't helping them in a way that they wanted, right? And so that can be another big challenge. You'd think that people who come to you looking for help would be open to some of your ideas, and oftentimes they're not open at all. They want help on their own terms. And it's like, why did you come to me at all then if you're not going to try any of the things I suggested? So those are some of the challenging aspects of being a pastor that come to my mind right off the bat. I'm sure there are more, but those are the ones when I first think about it that come to my mind. Burlap TV on Twitch says, good answers, thanks. First chance I've had to throw questions at one of you boys. Burlap, you can hit me with as many questions as you like, no matter what they are. So, yeah, feel free, go for it, and I'd be happy to interact in any way, shape I can, and help out in any way, shape I can. That's why I'm streaming, right? I could be preparing my sermon by myself without interacting with anyone, but then it would just be me, and I wouldn't have anyone ask me hard questions. So please feel free to keep throwing them at me. Burlap TV says number 2, everyone is critical about different things, is just like being a Twitch streamer with a smile face. Yeah, that's pretty funny. It's just such a struggle. You know, everyone wants you to do something different, and it's like, how do I... You're not trying to keep everyone happy, but by the same token, you're not trying to piss everyone off either. So it's like, how do you have that balance, you know? It's tough. I think this should come over a little bit. I'm gonna need more room. Rafe on YouTube says, my goal is to get as good with sermon preparation as you so I can do my own live virtual hours, hashtag goals. That's awesome, Rafe. I'd be happy to help you get there, brother. I'm excited with your opportunities that you've had thus far, and that'd be great. I don't know that this is ever gonna be a popular thing, Rafe, where pastors just stream their office hours. But I'll tell you what, if you start doing it, I know I would tune in, and we could have some good interactions. It's I don't know, it's a way for us to, I think, encourage one another in our faith and keep pressing on and try to keep improving in our craft of preaching. So yeah, I think it's a cool idea. I'm glad you enjoy it, and like I said, you start doing it, I'll watch you, I'll follow you. I'm there. Rafe says, nah, but I think it's cool. Well, I'm glad you do. I don't know that I have too many fans out there, so, but I'm glad you like it. Like I always say, I could be sitting here preparing this by myself in the quiet, or I could listen to some music and chat to some people while I do it. And the latter seems a lot more appealing to me, at least. Maybe it's the extrovert in me that feels like I want to stream while I'm doing an introverted task. Burlap on Twitch asks, do you see declining rates in religiosity within the United States as a problem that can be solved? I think so, Burlap. Let me think about this one too. You have really good questions, by the way. Declining rates in religiosity solvable. Are declining rates in religiosity solvable? Okay, let me think about this one. Yes, they're solvable. How? How are they solvable? Christianity needs to adapt. We're in a post-Christian society. And so, we haven't seen the gospel and how the gospel can impact people in a post-Christian society. We've only seen the gospel work fundamentally in pre-Christian societies. That's how kind of the West developed. But we're post-Christian. Now, the reason I think we're post-Christian, not the only reason, but a reason, is I think that we're post-Christian because certain aspects of traditional religiosity are out of touch. And I mean more tradition on these sorts of things. So there's a lot of traditional things in many religious circles that aren't okay. Like, I come from a Baptist context. A lot of Baptists won't go to the movie theaters, right? And they won't go to the movie theaters because they see it as, sinful or things like that. And if they personally don't want to go to the movie theaters, fine. I got no problem with that, right? Maybe not the best use of your time anyway. But if they're going to judge other people who go to the movie theaters, then I got a problem. And I think a lot of traditional religions are that way. They're very judgmental in the fact that they look down on others for the freedoms that they live by and the way that they function in their lives. And so I think a lot of people in the post-Christian societies equate traditional Christian principles with Christianity itself, and the two are not at all related, and that's irritating to me, actually. The fact that somebody could have certain religious scruples and give off the vibe or portray to others that this is what it means to be religious, this is what it means to be Christian, and I don't like that, and I don't like it at all, right? So that's one aspect. The second aspect I think that needs to happen is Christians need to be willing to dialogue. Oftentimes, Christians feel that because they have the Bible, which we believe to be God's word, inspired, inerrant, infallible, that we have the last say, we have all the right answers, and there's no room for dialogue. But the problem that Christians aren't realizing is that the Bible applies, and this is essential, to specific contextual situations. Okay, so let me give an example. The Bible nowhere talks about stem cell research, okay? But the Bible has many principles that apply to the modern concepts of stem cell research. And Christians need to learn how to take their Bibles, pull the principles out of it, and apply the principles of the Bible to their modern situations and modern contexts in a way that is charitable and includes dialogue with people. Rather than just saying, we know how it is, this is what you should do, this is what you shouldn't do. Instead, we need to be willing to have a conversation with people. When an unbeliever asks a Christian a question, they need to go, I never thought about that. Yeah, that's a good question. Maybe this is the answer. Do you think that makes sense? Oh, no, it doesn't? Okay, then maybe this would be helpful. Do you think that makes sense? And actually having a dialogue with people will get them to see that, oh, Christians can think. And yes, they're coming at things from a different perspective than me, but they actually are thinking about what they believe and why they believe it, and that's intriguing to me, right? A third aspect that I think is essential, we need to lean into the challenge. What I mean about this is a lot of churches recognizing points 1 and 2 have shifted gears, and instead of being religious institutions, they become like clubs where people get together and enjoy spending time together, and they actually turn away from hard truths, right? And so I'm thinking right now of big mega churches where you get a lot of people come together, they encourage one another, they say lots of nice things to each other, but they don't actually challenge each other, right? There are a lot of big churches, where the pastor will say things like, we need to love one another. You want to do better in life? Then follow God, and he'll just say these basic things, right? Instead, the Bible has a very challenging message for its adherents, and it is die to self. It is, your life is no longer yours to live. You should live it for God. All of these are the challenges that Christianity has historically always held on to. Things like repent of your sins and put your faith in Jesus Christ. We need to learn how to lean into these challenges, again, in a charitable way, and actually challenge people. I fundamentally believe that our current generation is not content to just sit back and float through life without being challenged. I think people want to be challenged. I think it's an inherent part of human nature that you want to be challenged. You want to be encouraged to do something hard. You want to be called to do something hard with your life. And Christianity has that in spades. New Age isms don't have it. Christianity has being challenged with something hard in spades, and we need to encourage that rather than shrink back from it. We need to challenge people and get people to embrace those challenges. I think some combination of these three things need to happen in order to solve the decline in religiosity in our day and age. So I don't know if that answers your entire question, Burlap, but I think it's where I would begin in trying to solve these problems. Rafe on YouTube responds as well. He says, yes, it's just legalism from fundamentalism, to the first point I was making. And he says, we have truth on our side. We have nothing to fear. Exactly. We shouldn't be afraid to dialogue with people at all if we think that what we believe is actually true, not just convenient. I don't believe in Christianity because it's convenient or it makes me feel good. I believe in it because I believe it's true. And if truth is truly on my side, then I don't have anything to fear. And I can lean into that and talk with people who have good questions. So I think some combo of those three things, Burlap, would be what I would use to try and solve the decline in religion in the West. And I'm sure there are more. There are more answers to that, but those are a start. Great questions, Burlap. I feel bad that you came along right at the end, because it's 8 o'clock now and I got to wrap up the stream. Maybe hit up a follow, Burlap, if you'd like to continue to interact with me in the future and you have more questions. But I really enjoyed your questions. I enjoyed interacting with you. Rafe, I enjoyed interacting with you as well. And yeah, I hope you guys have a good rest of your evening. Burlap says, no, it does answer my question. More so, I was prodding to see if you view the decline as a problem or not, but very well thought out answer. Thank you. Burlap says, I'll come back by. Thanks for answering my questions. No problem, Burlap. Really enjoyed it, and I appreciate the discussion. I do see the decline as a problem. I do, but I think it can be solved. I think there's things we can do to remedy it. But it is a problem in our day and age, and it's a challenge the church has to face that the church has never faced before. So, not sure what to do. Rafe says, the unbeliever can't reason and make sense of things without borrowing from our worldview. Okay, man, have a good night. Yeah, Rafe, the classic transcendental argument, utilizing Greg Bahnsen, all those things. I think those are compelling, but it's hard to get somebody to see an intellectual or philosophical argument like that, right? How can we make it real for them? I think that's a good question as well. Anyway, loved interacting with both of you tonight. Rafe, appreciate it, brother. I'll be praying for you and your preaching this upcoming Sunday. Burlap, really enjoyed talking with you, and I'd like to get to know you better as well. I'm sorry you came at the end, and hopefully I can interact with you more in the future. Both of you guys take care. Anybody who's watching by video, feel free to hit follow, like, subscribe, any of that stuff.